try to raise revenues, you know, there will always be somebody to complain with whichever one of those options we go with. So please, yeah, that's all I'm asking is we've got to be united in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Speaker. Senator Nelson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have two questions. The first one is for Department of Administration. How are special funds transferred?
Senator, thank you for that question. All our transfers, if appropriate, are governed by the GASB accounting rules.
Sorry,
So
I can hear you.
I'm talking of cash transfers. Please understand there's a difference between an appropriation transfer
Yes.
and a cash transfer. So in a special fund, like I said the other day, a special fund is defined by it has special revenue sources. Those revenue sources are obviously an estimate. So as sources accrue, as funds accrue into the fund, they may exceed the appropriations that are allowed for them. This body is the body that defines the appropriations.
How are special funds transferred?
I'm trying to answer, Senator.
Okay.
So if the funds exceed the appropriations, accounting rules require us to transfer those funds to the general fund because they become effectively the property of the general fund.
How are they transferred out of the special fund into the general fund? What is the process? How does the governor get the authority to move the special fund?
Well, I can answer from a cash point of view. From a cash point of view, the cash is transferred out of the special fund and into the general fund.
Does it have to be authorized by the director of the agency?
No, it doesn't. It's an accounting rule,
So the governor can pull it anytime he can?
provided that the appropriation is satisfied.
At the end of the fiscal year, during the fiscal year?
Generally, it's after the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. Was there any time that the governor pulled special funds out of the Flame Fund or the E911 fund before the end of the fiscal year?
Well, Senator, I don't believe so, but I cannot really answer that question
Okay.
since I've just got here.
Well, I would appreciate it if you can get us a concrete answer because you're under oath and we want to know the fact of it.
In my term there, Senator, I have never received any instructions to do such.
To move any money out of the Flame Fund or the E911 fund before the end of the fiscal year.
Not during my term, unless, as Mr. Byrne has stated, it's required by certain accounting standards, GASB.
Okay, can you just make sure, Mr. Arreola, and get clarification on that?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very
We will.
much. Thank you, sir. Chief Joey, I wanted to ask, or I wanted to clarify first that you had to take some ambulances offline historically for whatever shortages that you did have. Did you issue, or how many press releases did you issue when you were taking ambulances offline?
I never really issued any press releases when it comes to services, but we do, I mean, it's definitely covered by the media. I don't do press releases on a regular basis, but the media is informed one way or another, and then they end up doing a story about it.
Thank you very much, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Nelson. Any other questions or inquiries from members of the panel? We have Senator Espaldon and then Senator Tom Adams. Senator Espaldon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question will be towards Mr. Carlson. And again, I just want to get back to the basics, right? The bill before us right now is basically proffering that we increase the BPT 2 points from 4% to 6%. And instead of the original concept of extending it over 2 years, to do a 1-year sunset provision. During the course of the past several weeks, I think the information was that 1 percentage point, say for example from 4% GBT to 5%, will really basically enhance revenues or will bring in approximately $60 million annually. Are we still on the same note? Okay, good enough. And again, just coming back to the basics. So 60 divided by 12 is 5. So every month, and this is on average, we can see a 5. If we raise it by 1 point from 4% to 5% on the BPT, and there's only 7 months left remaining in this fiscal year, 7 times 5 would be a $35 million yield. Are we good? Are we okay so far?
If it begins in April, and,
Yes.
and we start collecting in May, so it's May, June, July, August, September.
Right. Okay. So 5. So 25 million.
That's consistent with the number from the
That's right.
SES.
So it'd be 25 million basically that if we did a 1%
For the remainder of this fiscal
for
year.
the remainder of the fiscal year. Okay, so that's 25. Let's say 25 million. And we'll agree upon that. And then here's where I got a question. When we first started this, in terms of the cost containment for the government, the first number that came out was 37 million. 15 million being from the executive, from the line agencies under the executive branch, right? So far, so good. And then on the other branches, the legislative, judiciary, and Department of Education, right? Then they'll make up the bulk, the rest of it. So to get to $37 million.
$22 million, correct.
$22 million, right. Now, we understand that the Department of Education in trying to get to their $18 million contribution to this, of reducing their costs, can really only come up with 12. So they're running short about $6 million on that one. So, in essence, from that $37 million figure, technically, if DOE cannot find any more areas in which they can cut, realistically, that's more of a $30 million cost containment so far. Is that good?
Yes, sir. That's consistent with how we looked at the line agencies, and to the extent that there was the ability to absorb the cut, but yeah, you're right.
Okay. And so now, if you add that 25 plus the 30, now we're at 55 again. Right, we're at 55. I guess the first question I have is there was a change, though, in that figure. When we were talking about $37 million in cost containment, right, and then when you came back with a fiscal realignment plan, that then became a $47 million figure.
Yep.
What was the difference between the $37 million that you initially came up with, and then when you came out with the fiscal realignment plan, you were able to contain the cost to $47 million?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to finally speak on the fiscal realignment plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, so for the body, the requirement that, again, we felt in the spirit of cooperation that we would provide a fiscal realignment plan to this body requires for it to be in bill form. So the only prudent thing that we thought we should do was to adjust the revenues, because we all agree on what the revenue shortfall is and what categories. So we did that. And then with respect to the $47 million, that is the pro rata share of the general fund cuts consistent with the circular that we issued for discussion. So it's in a bill form. The idea is that the bill would be entertained, discussed, and there would be some consensus on where cuts can and can't be made. So when the body called for that and we responded, it would only seem appropriate that, like with every other measure, particularly since it was required to be in bill form, that we would engage in a discussion on it. So we didn't want to be presumptuous and say, the university, good example, said they could absorb that cut this year. And we didn't think it was prudent for us to assume that that was the wish of the body and reduce that appropriation level. The only one that we did was DPW space utilization study, $150,000. I spoke with the director, and he told me that he's very certain that he could get the product for $100,000. So we took 50,000 off of that general fund appropriation.
Okay, so just to, I guess in my mind, just to make clear, right, when you came out in the fiscal realignment plan that the savings, if we do the pro rata cut across the board amongst all the budgets, that it would total amount $47 million. So far, so good?
The total was 47 million, right?
Right.
And we said we could probably get 15 comfortably from people who said that they could do it.
Right.
And we didn't get a response from DOE,
Right.
directly. They published it in the paper, which was fine. We did not get a response from the legislature.
Okay.
We didn't get a response from the Office of the Public Auditor.
Okay.
And the judiciary. So
Okay.
since we didn't get a response, we just put that.
You just went on
cumulative-
ahead and took their pro rata share.
Well, because,
No, and that's
the-
fine. And I'm just trying to understand the process that you used. And so I guess to surmise that, then what I'm arriving at, what I'm thinking is that when you came up with that figure, that understanding the legislative process, there's a lot of negotiating back and forth of what can give and what can't give, that you could probably assume that that $47 million would probably come down some, right? And is it realistic that, so let me just get this straight away then. Is it realistic to expect that $47 million in cuts to the budget can actually be implemented or not?
I don't believe that they can,
Okay.
but more importantly, as the Vice Speaker just pointed out, we have a $67 million shortfall in revenue.
I understand, and we're going to get to that figure in just a minute. I'm just trying to take it point by point by
Yes.
point so we don't get lost in a maze.
Yeah. So
Right.
a good example, sir, would be the Department of Corrections. When we asked them, can you take your pro rata share cut, and the answer was no.
And they cannot, and I understand that as well. Realistically, though, if we come back to that $37 million, and maybe even more realistic figure would be a $30 million, because if DOE can't come up with any more cuts, it would basically, can we agree that that might be a more realistic figure in terms of cost containment, from the budget?
Sure. There were agencies, as I mentioned, that said, well, I don't want to, but I could. The university's one.
Right.
The Office of the Attorney General is another.
Right.
So, as we would go down these agencies, there could be some discussion and agreement and, support based upon their responses that.
And would you say that it would be closer to the $30 million figure or closer to the $37 million figure?
I don't really remember off the top of my head, sir.
Okay, but so to be on the conservative side, let's work with a $30 million figure. Because again, if DOE cannot find that extra $8 million that is being asked of them, or $6 million, whatever it is, right, that reduces the $37 million by $7-8 million. So maybe we can just agree that $30 million would be the cost containment, right, at this point.
For discussion purposes?
For discussion
okay,
purposes,
sure.
right? And
Yeah.
that's a fair, safe number, conservative, I think, right, before we start talking about any increase in BPT.
I think if you're trying to say that we're going to be short and we're going to need to find revenue enhancements, and from a point of departure to move forward, for everybody to agree, we can't cut any more,
Right.
and we're still short. So we are. It's not
Right.
incumbent
Right.
to address.
And that's exactly what I'm getting to.
Good.
So if we can agree upon that $30 million figure, and you subtract that from the $67 million shortfall, what we're looking for now is $37 million. Okay. Can we kind of
I
agree?
follow your logic.
And so far we're okay?
Right.
Okay, so at $37 million, and then we take a look at a potential short-term bump up in the BPT of 1 percentage point, of 1 point, right? Since that in itself will yield, what do we agree upon, $25 million?
25.
So 30 plus 25, and that's where I'm coming to. So if we bump that up, we're still going to be short $17 million, right? Because you put that 25 plus the 30, actually it's only $12 million, because 25 million plus the 30 million that we'll be able to contain becomes 55 million, and the shortfall is 67. So $12 million is really what we're looking for if, and this is the condition, if we do bump up the BPT for a very limited term at this time. And this is only to address 2018, FY 2018, and nothing going into 2019 yet.
Correct.
Right? That's
Right.
and
And
because,
it also doesn't provide any money for the Guam Memorial Hospital or for the Department of Education. You're just talking about the
right
changes to the-
right now we're just talking about the cash crunch issue, because
Correct,
I'm not really
but-
sure that everybody here is convinced that we should solve even GMH's issue in this particular bill. And that's just the sentiment I'm getting, right? That really what's really the burning issue right now is, when we start talking to the police department, the fire department right now, and making sure that those critical services are addressed, it's really because of the shortfall that we can anticipate from this whole new tax plan that's coming, and we're going to be short $67 million from our general fund, from the appropriations, from our budget for this fiscal year, right? The hospital is a separate issue. Yes and no, I understand, right? But, and we'll talk about that. We'll set that aside right now, right? So technically now it's $12 million. And if we start talking about revenue enhancements, again, you did issue a 16 points in which there are possible areas in which we can enhance our revenue. And of course, one of them was increasing the BPT, but that's already been discussed, at least in this little discussion we're having, right? And then we're talking about the implementation of a sales tax, and that might take a little while. It may not happen all within to address this current cash crunch crisis. Another one is increasing the hotel occupancy tax. It has been discussed, maybe on the sidebar, that in the past, the hotel occupancy tax for our island was at 13%. Now it is at 11%. It went down, I believe, well, let's just leave it at that without getting into any real history. The bottom line is, in your opinion, right, is it possible to pass an increase in the hotel occupancy tax back up to where it was, to 13%? Because as I understand, that's where it was, and if you take a look at our neighbor to the north, the CNMI, their hotel occupancy tax is at 15%. Do you consider that a viable revenue enhancement that can happen actually quite quickly?
The figure that we have for this fiscal year, going from 11% to 13%, using the same time frame, again, is $2.9 million.
Okay, because now we're just looking for that $12 million, and that's why I'm bringing this up, right? So you take that 2.9, let's call it 3, right? 2.9 is close enough to 3. So now we're looking for $9 million, right? And that's what I'm even discussing, the implementation of a sales tax, which, again, might take a little time, but could add some revenues in the meantime. I know there's a movement to, and a bill probably ready to increase alcohol and tobacco taxes. Have you done any figures on that, or no real And I'm not faulting if you don't, because I haven't seen the bill myself, but I know it's been talked about. So we'll leave that one alone. Raising the other one, the other idea that's been coming around out there, and it's been discussed briefly here, is the real property taxes. And even property owners are saying, yeah, compared to other jurisdictions, it's quite low. And if we raise, right now, real estate property taxes go towards the TEFF, right, the Territorial Education Facilities Fund. And if we raise that, right now it generates probably about $20 million. Is that a fair figure annually?
It's a little higher than that.
Okay, 21, 22, 23, something like that, right? So, you know, and just for discussion's sake, if we raise that 100%, we're still going to be one of the lowest in the country, in the whole nation, in terms of property tax. So that would raise another $20 million that might be able to dedicate to education. So that kind of takes care of that whole argument about education.
But not in this fiscal year.
It won't be in this fiscal year.
Correct.
It'll probably be look at the long term. So we'll move on past that then. Although one of the things I do want to really explore and talk about, because I don't have a clear understanding, is item number 7, imposing an income tax surcharge only on corporate income taxes. And the reason why we take interest in that is because we all know that there's a good windfall under this new tax law that corporations will pay less in taxes and keep more in their pocket. Can you just kind of talk about what kind of income tax surcharge, I mean, what that really is?
Senator, does everybody have this SES document? So
Oh, yeah,
we're
that's
all
right.
working from the same, so, you know, this is the point of information. If you guys don't have it, you want to make sure people have it? So, I mean, that way you guys
Is
can follow.
anyone in the hallway in need of a copy of the document? Okay, 5-minute recess. Committee of the Whole is now back in session. Senator Espaldon, if I can ask you to finish your line of questioning. Senators, first of all, before we continue with Senator Espaldon, Senators, have you exhausted all of your questions to the Chief of Police and to the Chief of the Fire Department? And then if it's okay, yes, Senator Nelson?
Mr. Chair, I don't have any more questions for the chiefs, but I do want, I would still like the concrete answer that once the DOA finds out if the governor at any time moved special funds before the end of the FY when funds did not exceed appropriation. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you very much, Senator Nelson, on that deliverable. Mr. Byrne and Mr. Ariola, please take note. Chief Cruz and Chief St. Nicholas, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. You're dismissed. Senator Espaldon, you had the floor. If I can ask you to close out on your line of thought, and then I'll yield to the subsequent speaker, and then if by any chance you have any follow-on, I will entertain you.
Okay. I think more than a wrap-up, I do want, you know, when we left off, I was talking about the revenue enhancements that were contained in a previous bill that was a fiscal realignment plan that the governor submitted. And of interest at this point is an income tax surcharge only on corporate income taxes. And I'm not sure that I fully understand that. And I was looking, and if I don't understand it, I'm sure there are probably a few others in our body who probably could use a little more information on that. And so I was going to ask Mr. Carlson to go ahead and perhaps enlighten us.
Thank you, Senator Espaldon. For the body, we're talking specifically about page 3 and options 26 through 30, where it says income tax surcharge only on corporate income tax. That corporate income tax, we're focused on that because, as we all know, they're going to be paying less taxes. So the ability to implement through the Organic Act a surcharge only on this group of people because they're enjoying a reduced tax liability. So you see the ranges from 1% that would bring in $1 million, and 10% would bring in about $10.5 million. And again, since we're talking about taxes that would be paid on income for calendar year 18, this money would be available in the second or third quarter in fiscal 19.
Okay, in fiscal 19. So that's not really an option to address the immediate cash crunch that we're going to experience in fiscal year 2018.
No, sir.
Okay, then we'll leave that by the sideline. Mr. Chairman, I just beg another minute or two of your indulgence. I understand that there is a bill that has come out already, or maybe coming out very soon, in terms of increasing the H-2 visa application fee by doubling it. Any idea, Mr. Carlson, on if that should happen? Will that impact immediate revenues into the government?
We believe so. It's doubling the fee. It's currently $1,091, where
Right.
the $91 goes to public health.
Right.
But we just doubled it.
Okay.
And then the amounts over what we're currently collected will go to the general fund. So the rule of thumb basically is for every 1,000 H-2B applications, it would yield $1 million.
Okay.
So if we were able to process 2,000 this fiscal year, after the rate has been amended, and I think that's doable,
Okay.
given the upcoming construction
Right.
and the need that's been known by everybody. So I
Right.
think we could do that. That's a one-time fee.
It's a one-time fee only.
Yeah, we're going to be enjoying the withholding taxes that they would be paying in, and of course, whatever money they spend. But mind you, that would just be one time in fiscal 18.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. And so it may impact us on a very conservative figure. Is there a conservative figure of what we could see in 2018? Because I believe the cap is at 4,000 workers that might be allowed in. Can we conservatively say maybe 1,000 might be able to be processed within this year?
Maybe even 2,000.
Maybe
This-
even
this
two?
before the end
Okay,
of
and that would
September.
basically generate another $200 to $2 million just for this fiscal year alone.
That's correct, sir.
Okay, and again, I guess the point I'm trying to get to, as I wrap up, and I might come back for a few more questions, Mr. Chair, but is that in this bill calls for a 2-point increase over a 1-year period, and what I was just trying to see is if there is a possibility to kind of lay the landscape that maybe it doesn't have to be over a full year. Maybe there's something a little more agreeable in a very shortened time frame, whether it's going to be, Mr. Carlson, you want to say something?
Yeah, please, if you don't mind, sir. I would like the body to bear in mind, we have not collectively begun to look at fiscal 19. So if we increase BPT with the mindset that it's only going to help in this fiscal year, and if we have a $67 million shortfall after 4 months of the fiscal year, I think you can do the math, and the 19 shortfall is going to be more. So we need to start putting in the back of our head, or maybe even bringing it a little bit closer, to our conscious, that what we're doing now should segue into the 19 discussion, so that we don't do something that's only 2 months
It's
in
so
duration.
short-term in nature that I understand.
Yeah.
I guess the point I was getting to in terms of laying out all the revenue enhancement ideas that are on the table is that we haven't had the time to get out of these special sessions to introduce legislation to create that legislation to enhance revenues that would be effective in 2019, right? So right now, that's why, and I was just going down that road. And I understand your concern, but please understand the perspective that we definitely are trying to figure out how to, if we need to increase BPT, how can we minimize that impact upon the general population? Mr. Chair, I appreciate that extended time you've given me. And again, I know there might be another colleague of ours who might want to ask a question. I might want to come back and ask one last question or two. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Espadon. Senator Tamara, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one item, and this is to rev and tax. In one of the earlier meetings, we had discussed the possibility of, I forget what you called it, the tax amnesty or whatever, where basically we forego the penalty and interest. What amount might be available for this fiscal year? Can you talk a little bit about this tax amnesty idea?
Well, the tax amnesty program, basically is an infusion of quick cash that we can collect from the accounts receivable. I think maybe 10 years ago we did an amnesty, basically, and we collected so much of the taxes that were out there, and basically we gave them a time frame to submit their application. And then from that time, if it's a 6-month period, basically, they would have to come up with the total amount of taxes that are due, and in return, we basically will waive the penalties and interest. I think earlier I mentioned that there's a big receivable out there, and it all depends on who are the taxpayers that will come forward and basically say, I want to sign into this program. And then they're committed to work on that time frame to try and get the entire tax in for that duration of period.
So earlier, Senator, the preceding speaker was going down through the calculations of, the projected shortfall and the budget cuts, and how much might be generated from a 1% GRT increase. We're still looking at that level. We're still looking for $12 million. So, is that tax amnesty? Is that something fully within the authority of the executive branch to initiate? And if it is that something that it's looking to initiate fairly soon?
We are looking into it right now as my staff are looking at the total tax and also the total interest and penalties. But what really boils down really is who's going to actually come forward and say, okay, I want to actually, go into this program. And then if the program calls for a 6-month period, then they have that 6-month period basically to come in and make good on their application, in other words. So there's a lot of taxpayers out there that owes. It's just them coming in and basically saying, I want to join this program, I want to sign up this program, and then we go from there.
So that didn't quite answer my question. Is that something that you said you are looking into it right now?
Yes, we are looking at the total tax and looking at the interest and penalties. What are we looking at? The number of taxpayers, and if the program goes through, we would have to actually go out and announce that program that we're going to do a tax amnesty. The other programs, so it's not only in the receivables. It's also we offer it for people that are not filing to come in and basically say, make good for, with their filing, they're covered under those programs. So those are the things that we offer back then.
Do you think that this program might be a viable option to provide for that $12 million that Senator Espaldon was in the bottom of the bottom line calculations? We still need to find 12. Is this something, this tax amnesty, something that's very viable to be able to make up for that? I mean, to collect for that?
Well, basically we continue to aggressively collect taxes right now. That's one of the things that we're doing. It all depends on the taxpayers that we want to. If we go with this program, and we have 100 taxpayers come in and sign in this program, you probably won't realize anything until 6 months from now, or close to 6 months. In the meantime, we have a lot of other programs that are ongoing, which are, if a taxpayer wants to make an offer on their receivables, they can actually come in and make an offer, and our revenue officers would actually basically review those offers. So that's ongoing all the time. The only thing that I said, I think earlier to this body, is that it's really a discouragement for the people that are actually filing timely and paying timely. And, it's something that we look at the other side also and say, we have all these people that are actually filing timely and paying the tax timely, and at the same time also, we're going to give this amnesty to actually have people come in and file their return, or basically, sign up for a program and, get their penalties and interest waived at the end.
Thank you very much, Senator Eda. Vice Speaker Talai.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify with BBMR and Revenue Tax, and actually the entire fiscal team. On February 13, at the SES meeting, it was reported that you had sent out notices, the circulars, mandating $37 million in cuts. And then, maybe last week, we received a fiscal realignment plan that outlines $47 million in cuts. And I noticed that in the FY19 budget proposal, executive budget proposal, option 2, it outlines $67 million in cuts, assuming there are no BPT revenue enhancements. And I'm assuming that might have to change now that the estimates of how much less in revenue we're going to receive. Okay, I guess, so my question actually is just this. Is the government currently operating, as I thought that you represented on February 13, with under a $37 million cut? Or are we currently operating with $47 million in cuts.
Thank you, ma'am. To be clear, and I'm sorry for all the numbers bouncing around, back to Senator Espaldon's question and the construct of the fiscal realignment plan.
No.
We identified 47.8
Right, but have you
million-
ordered that throughout the agencies to be implemented, or have you, because you did tell us that you ordered the $37 million to be implemented, is that correct?
Yes. What we did was we sent out notices to everybody, including the judiciary and the university,
Yes.
as mentioned, and we got responses. And some people could do it, and some people couldn't. So what we represented at the SES and at the public hearing was
So have you not mandated those cuts, 37 million?
that was the first, like,
Correct.
what can you do? So what we've done subsequent to that is DOA has reduced allotments to UOG, GCC, DOE, the
What is
legislature.
what is the total, 37 million?
Um,
DOA has reduced allotments?
yeah, the
But
cash.
Mr. Carlson, I thought that you had represented to us that you at BBMR were making the adjustments to
Madam
the
Vice Speaker?
allocations so that it would meet the $37
ma'am.
million.
May I
Is that
finish?
correct or not?
Yeah, no, can I finish?
Well, if you could just answer the question that I'm asking
Yeah,
you.
but you're asking a question, there's a sequence, if I could walk you through a sequence without you interrupting me, then maybe we could finally
Mr.
be
Carlson,
clear.
Mr. Carlson,
then maybe I'll
please.
ask the Director of Administration is the government operating with reduced allocations of $37 million or not? Or are we not operating as if any allocations have been reduced?
Go ahead. That's really a budget question, and we operate based on what's released and approved by BBMR.
Correct. So, and you operate based on what's released and approved by BBMR. So what are you operating under?
And BBMR has requested reductions from all the government agencies.
Totaling what?
37 mil.
All right, so not totaling 47. That's all I wanted to clarify is so currently you've implemented $37 million of cuts. And I just wanted to clarify that that the premise of this bill that we are considering right now is that the $37 million in cuts are still necessary, even if this BPT increase passes, because only 1%, according to this bill, of the increase in the 2% increase of BPT is going to be going towards general fund operations. I mean, right? I mean, yeah. So, and it's possible, in light of the fiscal realignment plan proposal, that you would have to increase or decrease the allotments to meet the $47 million. Isn't that correct?
Repeat that again, Senator.
Well, okay. I guess I just wanted to confirm that even with this bill, if this bill was passed, the bill that's before us right now, that increases GPT from 4 to 6%, that even with this bill, the government is still going to have to cut for FY 2018 at least $37 million in expenses and possibly $47 million in expenses. Is that correct?
At least 37 million.
All right. And you're saying now we don't need to cut $47 million if this bill passed?
A lot of it depends when if and when that BPT increase
Okay.
takes place and the percentage points.
All right. And with the $37 million, are furloughs required in order to cut $37 million? Because it was my understanding with the Appendix A that we reviewed at prior hearings that furloughs that no agency responded that they would need to furlough their employees in order to meet the, circulars from BBMR. Are we going to require furloughs in order to meet the $37 million that is going to be required regardless of whether we pass this bill or not?
Madam Vice Speaker, did you want BBMR?
Do you want to answer that, Mr. Carlson?
Yes, please. It's been noted that the Department of Education is $6 or $7 million short. So it would probably necessitate personnel cuts at that agency.
All right, did you anticipate it for the executive branch agencies? Was that part of the plan? When they responded to your circulars, did anybody outline
Yes.
as part of their plans
Yes.
that they would furlough current employees?
Yes.
And so regardless of whether we pass this bill that's going to increase the BPT from 4 to 6%, you are anticipating furloughs?
No.
Because in order to meet the
No.
$37 million in cuts?
No. If we supplant the lost revenue, people like the Bureau of Stats and Plans, people like the Office of the Medical Examiner.
But you said, okay, I'm not understanding supplanting the lost revenue. If this bill is only going to take care of the difference between $37 million in cuts and the 67 lower revenues for FY 2018, and the $37 million in cuts you just testified could only be achieved with furloughs? That's the first I'm hearing of that, because then it looks to me that regardless of whether we pass this bill or not, you are anticipating furloughs. Mr.
No, ma'am, I think
Byrne?
we're both confusing each other right now.
All
Okay?
right, well,
So
let
the
me just ask Mr.
response-
Byrne, have you implemented furloughs for the agencies in light of the $37 million reduction? Does that $37 million reduction that you're operating under require furloughs? Have you implemented that?
So we haven't implemented furloughs. We've started the process in the expectation of reduced cash intake.
Reduce cash intake, yes. But is it pursuant to their reductions in allotments by $37 million?
I really think there are two separate activities going on here. The allotments have been and are being reduced. The furloughs is an exercise which we have begun, and we're waiting for the departments to come back to us with information of how they're going to each department is going to implement that.
All right. Have you received details, for example, from the Guam Police Department, how they were going to implement their reduced allotment? The circulars, I thought the response to the circulars outlined each agency's plans as to how they were going to reduce their allotments. I mean, operate under the reductions.
Yes, but it's a different exercise. We're waiting.
No,
for
I
them
know,
to
that's
come
not
back.
related to the furlough, that's why all right, each agency, when they were ordered to cut a total of $37 million, either responded with how they were going to do that, or didn't respond, and so we can only guess how they're going to do that. But out of those that responded, we've heard today that some of those agencies already anticipated that they would need to implement a furlough. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. No agency has anticipated they need the furlough. We're waiting to hear from those agencies about how to not implement a furlough. I mean, the governor's executive order was a 32-hour working week, and that's what we're waiting to hear.
Have you reviewed? All right. So do you think that all right, well, let me just ask you one more time then. If this bill was passed as is, does it does it alleviate the need to cut $37 million from the overall appropriations of all the agencies?
No, Senator. Again, the bill takes into account 2 percentage point increase in BPT plus the required reductions.
All right.
It's a combination of both to meet the $67 million shortfall.
All right, so it's potentially, it's possible that the agencies, in order to meet that necessary reduction, they're looking right now, you're saying, at how they're going to do that, that we don't have that in concrete anywhere.
If I may, when the first go around, there's a legal sheet. I don't have it. I believe BBMR has
Right.
it, and it shows how much what their reduction
Correct?
requests were. It shows how much they actually cut.
Yes.
And then at the way to the right, it showed their consequences of what those reductions meant.
Right.
I think those were furnished to all the senators.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's where we get all this, that's where we, at least for me, that's where I got the understanding that there were 37, that we are going to operate since that point with a $37 million reduction in revenue, regardless of whether this bill passes or not. Because even when this bill passes, you're going to have to keep that cost
Correct.
reduction. Is that
Correct.
correct? All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Speaker Talahi. We have Senator Rodriguez, Senator San Nicolas, and then Senator Nelson. Senator Rodriguez, you have the floor. Okay, Senator Rodriguez is yielding to the next speaker. Senator San Nicolas, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to express my thanks to BBMR for their work in putting together this fiscal realignment plan. I deeply appreciate being able to have basically a very, very clear look as to how they're trying to move forward given the challenges that the coffers are facing. I wanted to ask, because we're kind of looking at this now as a multi-year exercise. I mean, we're trying to get through the end of the fiscal year, but the reality also is that if we're going to be adjusting tax policy, it's most likely going to be carrying over to the next fiscal year anyway. And so I wanted to ask if BBMR can help us to get a clearer look as to what this budget would have amounted to had the Trump tax cuts been in effect at the beginning of the fiscal year. So because I know that this is right now a snapshot in time, it's as of current, but if we had to make these adjustments from day one, what would the revenues have dropped all the way down to? And the reason why I'm asking for that help is because by seeing that, if we can project like a 3% revenue growth for next FY 2019, then that can help us to get a gauge of how much short we're going to be in FY 2019 when you factor in the growth and then you look at whatever tax options are out there or whatever cut options are being discussed. And I just want to make that request because if we're going to be talking about adjusting tax policy, it's definitely going to encompass more than just this current fiscal year. So would it be too challenging, or is there a basic formula that BBMR can give us that we can do the work ourselves to be able to get a what if scenario of the budget if Trump tax cuts had been in effect since day one?
Thank you, Senator San Nicolas. We collaborated with OPA and OFB, and on the February 13th meeting, I believe it was then that OFB had the real-world withholding information to be able to refine the numbers. Therefore, that's when we went from 47.8 up to 67. And they also adjusted the corporate rate and the individual rate as well. So we have the ability to extrapolate what a full year would be collectively using that agreed upon formula. So the one thing though that we did in a conscious effort was to try to tackle 18 with, as I mentioned earlier, the eye on 19 so that we didn't increase BPT by just 1% when we know that the problem will loom larger and that it might be more prudent to look at 2% with the revenue enhancements to be able to address what it is that we're going to be looking at in 19 with a better idea given the responses from the agencies. Some of them were able to shoulder cuts, and I think that might carry forward in 19 because if you can do this in 18, 4 months in, you might be able to do it for a whole fiscal year. Some agencies, some just can't do it, and I think that's readily apparent. So the public expects, and we believe that we are cooperating and demonstrating that we are right-sizing, and we are proffering some suggestions directly, unfiltered from the agencies themselves on what it is that they're going to be doing. And I think it's going to provide an additional tool once we understand what the impacts are and what the reduced, in some cases, funding requirement may be for 19. I think it's going to be sequentially helpful.
Okay, yeah, I can see how that all comes together, because when you talk about the on your revenue enhancement plan, the increase of the BPT from 4% to 6% for the full FY19, it is $118 million, and that, I mean, I'm just based on just my cursory analysis, that would pretty much make up for what is a dramatic difference in 2019. But the reason why I'm asking for the numbers on the front end is if we don't do a 2% increase, which I know that the body's been going through this exercise for quite some time already. If we don't do a 2%, if we choose some other option here, we're going to need to be able to tweak the figures, and so that tweaking could happen not only on the revenue side but also on the savings side. For example, in 2019, we may want to cancel certain municipal leases. We may have an expectation that the governor in FY 2019 kicks in $8 million in compact impact. There's different scenarios that we can play out on the budgetary side. I know that the cleanest way is what's been presented, which is just a flat 2% increase in the BPT. But if we want to try and figure out where in the budget we can shave off more, we're going to need to know what the impact would be. So, is it safe to assume then that if we just took the FY 2018 numbers and lessed out 118.98 million, that is what the FY 2019 budget should look like? Absent any BPT increase? Because right now the proposed BPT increase of 2% would bring in 118 million in FY 2019. And so if BBMAR is saying that 2% increase would have made up for the 2019 shortfall, then it can be assumed that the 2019 difference is $118 million from the budget that was adopted for FY 2018 prior to the cuts, the Trump tax cuts.
Yeah, if we assume we made those assumptions, then it would net out. So yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I do appreciate again in the fiscal realignment plan how you guys actually went into the different itemized categories of corporate, individual, and withholding. So if we could get that help to see what it would have looked like if it had been effective from day one of the fiscal year, then we can just push forward that number at a 3% growth rate or whatever we wanted to, and then from there figure out how we wanted to adjust the budget, either cuts or revenue enhancements. My other question, Mr. Chairman, I very much appreciate this revenue enhancement scenario that was drawn up. I just wanted to clarify the FY 2019 column. That is a addition to that is in addition to, right? So for example, the FY 2019 column on the revenue enhancement option under hotel occupancy tax, if you were to raise it from 11 to 12%, we're actually talking about an increase of $3.65 million on top of it's not an the actual isn't 3.65, it's in addition to.
You're looking at hotel occupancy tax?
Yeah, just for example, I'm just trying to make sure I'm reading the column correctly. That's an increase on top of what we're already bringing in.
Yeah, so the 11 to 13, option 8, is that what you're looking at?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch you.
Option 8?
Option 8, yeah.
Yeah. So for a full fiscal year, the 7.29?
For the full fiscal year, that will be the increase
Yes,
on top of the regular amount that's brought in.
correct.
Okay. Okay. And we can find that, and that's why I kind of wanted to back the numbers out on the fiscal realignment plan, because if we can get a harder number, a harder figure on, for example, something like that, then we'd be able to gauge, okay, maybe if we reduce slightly the marketing budget on that side, we might be able to push a little bit more into the other side. So that's kind of why I wanted some clarification on the numbers. But just to clarify also on option 18, the 100% increase on property tax on land and improvements, that's an additional 29.51 million. So the current is 29.51, and we're going to just basically double that. Okay. And so just to make sure my math is correct too, I'm looking at option 18 and option 20. Option 20 is on improvements only, and option 18 is inclusive of land. So if I were to less out option 18 from option 20, that's how much land only if we were to just increase the land.
Right. The idea was that there might be some people who don't have the vested interest because they don't have an improvement, like a mortgage.
Right.
But they may be not able, they might be only able to afford that tax on just the property itself.
Right, okay.
And we wouldn't want to burden them, so that was
Okay.
one of the considerations.
Now, my other question was, I'm noticing here in the FY 2018 on the revenue enhancement options, it's zeroed out on the property taxes. But that's based on the assumption that we're only going to go with the current schedule of payments. But if we were to add a new payment schedule, like for example, a June payment and an August payment, we could technically add those numbers into 2018.
Actually, the bills went out. The first installment was paid February 20th.
Yes, February 20th and April. If you want to change the due dates, because real property is really assessed on the first Monday of March.
Right.
And I just want to comment that these numbers are based on assessment.
All right.
And not necessarily that you're going to collect the full amount. Usually there's, we've been collecting 26, 27 million, I guess, annually. So just a point of information on that one. But you would have to change the law if you wanted to change the collection period.
Right. But since that's what's on the table anyway, a change in law, if we wanted to actually create the opportunity to accrue some of these figures in 2018, we could technically create a second assessment period just for this fiscal year, and then make it be a single assessment broken down into 4 payments every ensuing year thereafter. So there is a way that we can actually push revenue into 2018 if we were to consider some of these options. And lastly, I noticed that there is no breakdown on sales tax. Do we not have an idea of what sales tax might look like, or are we to assume that the business privilege tax figures are the most accurate we can probably get on a sales tax assumption?
With no exemptions, we believe that they're close. It's when you start putting in exemptions to sales tax that you're going to start to see the variations between the two.
So this assumption here is without exemptions or with exemptions? On the BPT, I think this is with exemptions here. So the sales tax might actually be higher because there won't be any exemptions?
No, I think it would be lower sales tax. Because if you exempted food and you put a 2%, right, it's 2% less what you would ordinarily be collecting on what you're collecting for BPT, because BPT is everything. So
Right.
if you put an exemption for food and medicine, then your revenue base is going to not match the BPT, because there are exemptions where in the BPT there aren't any.
No, what I'm saying is if you were to implement a sales tax without any exemptions, because the BPT has exemptions already priced in here, it may actually be higher.
It'll be a little bit higher, yes.
It'll be a
With
little
no
bit higher.
exemption, let's just talk about what if you have exemptions, it'll be lower.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I could just close by asking if BB Mark can assist us with getting us a an illustration as to what a full fiscal year 2018 would have looked like if the Trump tax reforms had been in effect from day one. And then from there, that would give us, I think, a very clear picture as to how we would have applied some of these things and how we can probably consider applying them going forward into 2019. Because at the end of the day, we're going to have to come up with some kind of a policy decision that's not only going to impact 2018, but it's also going to impact 2019. And by having those figures in front of us, I think you'll help us to make the cleanest determination possible. But again, I wanted to thank BMR for the effort and the governor's office. This information is very, very helpful. We also have a summary of review and analysis from OFB on the fiscal realignment plan. I did have a question on that. Was BBMR able to review this from OFB, or is this just a body document?
It was provided to us, I believe, at the same time.
Okay. What I'm looking at here is OFB is saying that there's only a 17.89 million shortfall based on their analysis of the current fiscal year. And I'm trying to figure out how to reconcile that with what with what BBMR is putting out, because if it's only 17 million, then that really changes up the various options that we might want to consider here, because then we can really, I mean, there's just a lot more options. So does BBMR have any comment as to the analysis of OFB with respect to the shortfall of 17.89 million versus the, I believe it was 37 million that was from BBMR?
Yeah, the difference, Senator, was the amount for the 2% set aside. So when you have a reduced budget, then you have a reduced set aside number. And so if you add back in that amount, which is about 3 million, I think it was like $3 million, or no, $1.34 million. So then you get $19.23 million plus the 47.82 that's identified on the total appropriations, and they come up to 67.
So when you say the 2% set aside, you're talking about the deficit reduction plan?
Yeah. So when you have reduced revenues, then of course it's 2% of a lesser number. So that difference here wasn't picked up here, but it was picked up on a subsequent page. Yeah. And so you see it on page 4, the 2% reserve number, 1.34, the variance column. And so when you add it back up, it totals when you add back up.
On the 2% reserve at the bottom there of total income
Correct.
tax revenue. But if we less that out, because really that's a, I mean, I know it's public law, but that's technically just, it just basically impacts the numbers. But if we're talking about trying to find hard cash to be able to meet operations, that 2% reserve is a figure that we can less out if we were to add that back into the,
Yeah, it was just a difference because let's say it's like $12 million, and then when you have the 67, then it goes down by $1 million. So it's just the math, the way it worked out.
So BBMR concurs then that the shortfall is what OFB says in their analysis of 17.89 million?
If you add back in and then add back up the cuts, then
The cuts.
We're at the same number.
So if we were to go with the cuts that have already been committed to in the circular and add back the 2% reserve, then we would only need to figure out a revenue solution of $17.89 million.
Actually, it's 19.23 when you add back in the 1.34 million.
So it's between 17.89 to 19.23 million. That's the range that we're going to need to look for.
Yeah, and that takes into account the full $47 million, which I think the body's already discussed may not be, well, it is not possible. I mean, we can't cut DOC. We can't cut the chief medical examiner because he's only got a one-person operation. The Bureau of Stats and Plans, their general fund appropriation is like all personnel, so we'd already be cutting into warm bodies. There's a few other examples that I would suggest that we, sit down and go through just so that we're all comfortable about what it is the result is.
Okay, and if we could get a firm handle on that. So this 17.89 to 19.23 million will be contingent on 47.8 million on cuts that you're suggesting is not something that we can do.
We can't, that 47.8 is the total pro rata share.
Right.
And then the base for our memos, and then the agency responses for the first set of agency responses. And again, when we asked GPD, could you absorb this? And they came up with a litany of things that they couldn't do in order to absorb it. And theirs was like 2.6 million. And then DOC, somewhere in the same range, 2.5 million. And they're so hard pressed up there right now, there's no way they could do it. So those are just a few examples that would take the 47 and then whittle it down to like the 37. So the university said they could, GCC said they could, AG said they could.
So we could do, so based on the feedback that you've gotten, we can do 37 million in cuts.
Yeah.
So then the range that we need to find is between 27.89, I'm just going to add back the 10. So the range we need to find in revenue enhancement is between 27.89 to 29.23.
Yeah, I think with Senator Espaldon, we kind of settled on 30 after we went through that back and forth.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So we basically got to take that $30 million figure, and if we're going to just basically figure it out here on the revenue enhancement side that you have, that 30 million is on the FY 2018 side of the equation, and we still need to see, based on my request, what the FY 29 side of the equation might be. Okay. So, and in light of all this discussion, Mr. Chairman, until we can get a firmer handle on the FY 2019 numbers, it's still premature for us to pass amendments to this bill, or even to pass this bill as it stands, because if we're going to pass, with the exception of the fact that this bill as it stands is supposedly going to cover the full difference, but if we're looking for options in terms of which tax or which revenue enhancement plan we want to go with, we're going to need to have a better handle on what the FY 2019 needs are going to be. So I thank the panel for providing the information.
Thank you very much, Senator San Nicolas. And the deliverable, the request to BBMR is to provide the full impact of the Trump tax reform for one entire fiscal year. Okay. Thank you very much. Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much again to the panel. Just for the record, Mr. Carlson, the legislature did respond to the first circular that we met with DOA when Christine Valletta was still there, and so we accepted the nearly $900,000 cut as well from this side. So going back to the bill, I know earlier we tried to move an amendment that would somehow replace the anticipated revenue stream that this bill proposed us to do with the increase in BPT, and unfortunately that failed. I do have another amendment that I'm ready to do, and at a time when the chair deems that it's appropriate. But it's an amendment that I really do not want to do, because it's something that it's going to affect a lot of good people, employees in this hall, employees at the governor's office as well, and employees throughout the government, our leaders in our departments. And so what I want to ask, I don't know whoever can answer this question here, is that some actions have already been taken, and I realize and I understand the governor does have that authority to manage and to operate the executive branch. He has that responsibility and authority as well to deal and adjust with the fiscal crisis we have. It is this body, though, that really our responsibility is to set the fiscal policy. And what we've seen the past few days is, and I know that some of my colleagues here have talked about it when the chiefs of police and fire was here earlier, and I don't mean to say this in a bad way, but some have kind of downplayed, what actions already have been taken in terms of shutting down the Hagåtña precinct and the fire stations. And for how you see it, this is real. I'm going to talk about my village of Dededo, Astumbo Fire Station. The mayor has reached out and has indicated that the closure of that fire station affects and puts people's lives in jeopardy in that surrounding area. And so that's very concerning to me, and I'm sure it's very concerning to our colleagues here. And as I said last week, and I really felt we were in that right direction when it seemed so dark, in here with the situation we're facing, but I really felt like there was light at the end of the tunnel with the different proposals that each senator here brought forward, with the proposals that the administration has brought forward in terms of revenue enhancement. And I know that there's a public hearing scheduled for Wednesday, Thursday of this week. And really, we could be here on Friday to deal with those bills that have public hearings. And so, my question is that, absent of us passing this bill, whether we try to tonight, whether there's 8 votes to pass it or not, what other drastic measures are going to happen between now and when this body comes back, I think on Friday, perhaps, or Saturday, to deal with those bills, the sales tax bills that are scheduled for a public hearing? Are we going to expect to see a press release come out after this that another fire station or police precinct, being shut down in the next few days? Is that something that anyone here can answer? Can you just go on, Rick?
Sir, speaking for myself, but I think, we're here with you guys. We're trying to find consensus for a solution. I think the exercise that Senator Espaldon walked us through, Senator Sinicolas, and also the Vice Speaker, it clearly points out that there, regardless of what we like and we don't like, that there needs to be revenue enhancements, and we're asking for the body to come to an agreement on what those are. We think BPT is the more immediate thing, but we really are committed to working with the legislature on a number of other things that we offered, and we're open to more ideas other than those that came with the fiscal realignment plan. So a combination of cuts, a combination of revenue enhancements, and then the willingness to put into place certain other things like a sales tax that have that longer term financial stability attached to it. But there just needs to be some movement, like soon, so that we can get past this first hurdle and start working on what on this menu of revenue enhancements we're all comfortable doing, so that we can have a better idea, as Senator Sinicolas and everybody else here, I think, is aware of how we navigate 19. So we have an 18 issue to deal with, which we should use as a parallel effort to get into 19. The 1 year BPT brings us 6 months or so into fiscal 19, and how our requirements in 19 will benefit from that should be also part of everybody's discussion. If we have sales tax in place for 19, and we have a little history on what the off-island sales, taxing that, will bring us, it just behooves us to move in that direction quicker so that we get the data to say, okay, the BPT can stay at 2, or maybe it can go down to 1.5 because we have a sales tax that brings in this much money, and it's been doing it for 4 months prior to 19, so that we have that history and some certainty that the fluctuations and the revenue that came in were something we can rely on, at least a percentage of it, so we could be conservative. So I mean, we've been asking for assistance to be able to at least start the process of having something so that DOA can revise their cash flow, knowing that we're going to get 2% BPT for the rest of the fiscal year, and see how that just alleviates a lot of the pressures that we are all experiencing, and then take the next step into 19. So,
Okay, so,
you know,
so thank you. So even if we pass, let's say we pass sales tax, one of the sales tax bills Friday, that is not going to cut it. It's got to be the BPT.
I would propose that we get the BPT, get some relief, and then take the next logical steps. And I think the sales tax thing on island, but more importantly from my perspective, the off island, because we're just going to be taxing some goods at a reduced level with exemptions. So if I go to a store, if I go to Kmart and everything was in the checkout and I didn't have to go to the pharmacy, right? So my medicine, I might not get the increase, but everything else that I bought, I'll get that increase. So there's going to be a little bit of fluctuation, but the off island, we're not getting anything. The online sales. So I mean that's all gravy from my perspective, because we don't get a dime from that right now.
Yeah, no, I completely agree about we should be capturing these off-island sales. But just going back to my question, so absent a PPT increase, there's really nothing else that we can do for the immediate $67 million proposal on how to bring in extra revenue.
I know that the speaker's not here, but I've sat next to him and with him at SES and during these meetings and as well as public hearings, and he stated that he's even offered the 1% BPT. So it's not just us saying it. There are
no, I know the speaker has offered that compromise, but so it's the BPT. That is what's needed. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That's what, even if we try to do a sales tax effective March 15, it's not gonna cut it. Is that a fair assessment?
That's my opinion, yes.
So that's a fair assessment then, because that's important for us as we move along here, because if that's the case, and if there's no consensus here, as you said earlier, to do that, then that means there's going to be other drastic cuts that the governor, which he has the authority to do, is going to happen. And so we need to make that decision here, whether we're going to, to step in as well and ensure that these drastic measures don't further jeopardize the public health, the education, and the safety. So, that's for me, I think you answered my question, is that a BPT is what's needed. 1 or 2% is what you're saying is needed immediately to be able to rectify this.
Yeah. And again, I would be remiss if I didn't advocate for the 2. And again, that as we were discussing with Senator San Nicolas and everybody else here, and it's borne out in the SES reports that you guys have, we're just dealing with 18, and we know 19 is bigger. So, we're going to need something. And to the extent that we can supplement it with the sales tax and these other revenue enhancements, the tax on the rent-a-cars, the surcharge, whatever else people think of, I think we can collectively say, okay, it goes down. And then maybe we can talk about a sunset.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Rodriguez. Senator Nelson, any other senators who would like to chime in the conversation? If I'll recognize Senator Espadon after Senator Nelson. Senator Nelson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This was in reference to the questioning given by the Vice Speaker. It doesn't add up that in the attachment that was given to us in Mr. Carlson's testimony, where the pro rata shares were required for the agency reduction responses to BBMR Circular 18-04, there's $15.7 million in cuts. DOE And then these are, okay, so let me, to be a little bit more clear, because not everyone's looking at this. It's the attachment 1 in Mr. Carlson's testimony. So we look at the agency reduction responses to BBMR Circular 18-04, that's 15.7 million, so that's all the agencies that responded. The agencies that did not respond to the BBMR circular but is required to make these cuts, DOE is $18 million, Judiciary $3 million, OPA $0.1 million, Legislature $0.9 million, which in total is roughly $37.7 million. And so in response to the $67 million shortfall, in accordance with the 2% BPT, it will level us out to having $24.7 million available for GMH and DOE and GDOE. Now, what doesn't add up is we are still facing this shortfall of 2.7 for GFD and GPD, $2.9 million. With these proposed cuts, they're still being required because the furlough takes time. They're still being required to make the cuts now to save money down the line, just in case we don't get a 2% BPT revenue. And so the question was, and I think there was some debate about it, that we didn't start the furloughs yet, we started the process, but we have the fire chief saying that in order for him to meet operational needs as far as salaries is concerned, he had to shut down fire stations so that he wouldn't have to pay an increase in overtime. So we're already seeing the impacts of the $2.7 million cut to GFD, and then today we saw the impacts of the $2.9 million to GPD. And so what doesn't add up is that you're saying that the furloughs have not happened, but the process is in effect. And this is for you, Mr. Burns. But yet, even with the 2% BPT, this is the exact same plan that we are looking at, the exact same financial plan required for the pro rata share of all the agencies, and we're already seeing the cuts being implemented. And so the question was before you, if these cuts are being implemented because the AG issued an opinion of the furlough process and a 32-hour work week, the timeline required, how can we guarantee that the furlough or the 32-hour work week will not be impacted when the cuts are already being shown here that is still being needed to be done even with the bill being passed at a 2% BPT? It's complicated, right? And I'm just trying,
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but you're also asking me to testify on Mr. Carlson's testimony, and I'm not sure I can do that.
No, I'm not asking you to testify. This is something that was also discussed on the SES, and so this was the breakdown required, and these are actually the hard numbers given to us from BBMR. And so earlier you said that if we have a 2% BPT, we would not need to furlough. Is that correct?
Well, no, I think what I said is without additional sources of revenue, we would have to implement the 32-hour working week.
Okay. So, and then I don't know if I'm out of line, Madam Chair, just tell me, but I'm going to make reference to your questioning. So and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the acting speaker inquired that if we pass the bill for the 2% BPT, will this be the solution to stop the furloughs and the 32-hour work week? And you could not answer that directly.
Yes, I think Mr. Carlson already did answer it, that if we get sufficient BPT income, yes.
What is sufficient BPT? See, that's the thing, Mr. Burns, is we're not getting direct answers. We're getting novelty words. I'm asking you a very direct question.
Well, Senator-
2% BPT, if it passes tonight, is that what you would call
Senator,
sufficient
you
income?
You flatter me. 2% is sufficient, if that's the answer you're searching for.
So if 2% is sufficient, if 2% is sufficient, why is there a requirement still, as addressed in the SES and in the BBMR circular, why is there still a requirement for the agencies to cut? Can you answer me directly, Mr. Carlson, and not
Yes.
take me around the bend?
It's a $67 million shortfall. The agencies could only come up with $15 million. That brings it down to $51 million. The BPT for the rest of the fiscal year is like 49 if we use the numbers here. And for my presentation, I added another month, so that 54 million is because I was optimistic.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I
So,
understand.
we have a situation where collectively $67 million, even if they took the entirety of the 47, there's still the 20 that Senator San Nicolas and I just, basically found. But knowing that agencies just can't absorb the full 47, right? We're still going to need the 2%. And that doesn't take into account a dime for GMH and a dime for DOE.
Yes, I understand, because whether or not we do the 2% BPT, the agencies will still have to pay forward the pro rata share to level out.
At a reduced amount.
A reduced amount?
Yeah.
What is the reduced amount?
So the circular went out and it identified $47.8 million to a bunch of different agencies, and our responses that came back, said maybe we can do, in our opinion, our assessment was 15. So that left, essentially, $52 million that we had to find.
So what would be the reduced amount for GFD?
Pardon me?
What would be the reduced amount for GFD?
Oh, they were requested to reduce by $2.7 million.
Okay. So we're still looking at the same number, $2.7 million for GFD and then 2.9 for GPD.
GPD didn't offer that they could participate in cuts.
Right. But that's still what they're looking at to cut. That's still what they're looking at to cut, no? Or are they not cutting anything?
No, everybody's streamlining. Everybody's doing. We've taken their and put stuff, allotments, budget allotments on reserve, just to be able to handle the situation, make sure we have better controls. So, no matter which way you cut the cookie, even if we asked everybody to absorb the 47, which would be asking too much, would be impossible. We still don't generate enough money to get to the $67 million level.
Right. And that's my concern, is that we're still looking to cut the agencies with the 2% BPT, and now we're seeing the impacts of our public safety having to put forth their pro rata share, and it looks like there's no guarantee whether this will stop us from going into, from putting the furlough in effect when the process is completed, or from putting the 32-hour work week in effect when the process is completed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Is there any other senator? Is there any other senator? Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. I know that I did inquire with the GFD chief about the recruitment of the 45 officers, whether that will result in any cost reduction. But I'm still looking at the numbers, and if I can ask you, Mr. Carlson, the same similar question that I did ask, because if you go out and you recruit, then automatically your personnel costs increase. even if it's for the balance of the fiscal year, 5 months. I understand the nature of getting them all trained and getting them all fully assigned to the respective sections, but has that been part of the consideration on the part of BBMR in terms of postponing, and I rephrase that again, postponing that particular recruitment at least until the beginning of the fiscal year, the next fiscal year?
We'd have to sit down with the DOA and the fire department. I would submit that there's been so many resignations. They're really shorthanded that they do need to backfill the entry level positions and begin to get them up, and that there might be a discussion on what the appropriate number would be. I heard your point of view. You're still going to have albeit lower because they're just recruits, cost of personnel, but eventually we need to realize that they need to be put in place.
No, we understand that.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Okay. So at least there could still be a discussion in regards to the number.
Certainly.
Okay. The other question I have, and I'll just close with this, Madam Chair, is looking at all the movement with regards to personnel over to DOC to try to contain their costs. Would it be more financially cost effective if in fact they were to recruit another class of recruitments?
I'm sorry, sir, I didn't get
With all the movement on reassignment of personnel over to Department of Corrections, my question is, would it be more financially cost effective if in fact DOC were to actually go out and recruit a whole class of, whether it's 20 correction officer recruits to help augment the requirement up there rather than the reassignment and reshuffling of all these personnel? And let me just give you a perspective. And the concern I have, it really is, and I understand from the administration perspective, the administration effectuates the movement of personnel, but my concern is that when you have Guam Police Department officers actually arrest these individuals, they are prosecuted and eventually confined at Department of Corrections. Now we're reassigning 30 plus police officers into that environment. And that to me is an added safety concern for the lives of these police officers. So my question again is, would it be more financially prudent and cost effective if in fact DOC was given an opportunity to recruit additional corrections officers, get them trained up, and have them assume the responsibility there rather than reassigning some of these personnel that could otherwise be utilized in the community?
That's quite possible depending again on entry-level salaries, and the time it takes to recruit individuals, things of that nature. But
and the reason why I asked
I see your point.
also, Mr. Ariola, is because I know DOC, they have implemented an expedited training program. So in that case, if they're able to go out and actually recruit personnel, bring them in at entry-level recruit status, and then to Corrections Officer 1 within a reasonable time frame, whether it's 2 months or 3 months, then at least you would have the new correction officers providing services at Department of Corrections, and then you would be able to relieve the 30 plus, I understand the number is 37, Guam Police Department officers and reassign them back to the department so that they can actually ensure the public safety of our community. So thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Is there any other senator who has questions for the panel? Senator Espadon, you're recognized.
Thank you. And this is to Mr. Camacho. Mr. Camacho, I finally was able to read a newspaper after having not read one in several weeks, because we've been at this for quite a while now. But I noticed an ad that was in the paper concerning some kind of tax conference or a symposium that's coming up later on this week. And I saw your name on it, and so, I guess you're one of the speakers. But they're bringing in some expert in from off island as well to talk about the ramifications of the new tax policy and maybe what some jurisdictions should be thinking about. Do you know anything about that? I mean, that you could tell us that do you think that that would enlighten us to help us move forward in terms of any fiscal policies that we should be considering along with this, or maybe even in place of this? And again, I'm not insinuating, I'm just wondering if you know anything more about that.
You know, I know there's something that's coming up, but I'm not. I think Marie Benito is probably aware of that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No, you've been
Yeah.
here with us, so I think you haven't
Yeah.
noticed it, just like me, until, like I said, finally read it. But thank you. But Madam Chair, at this point, we've been here. We've been following this issue and been in discussion for at least 3 weeks now. There's been a lot of information, and even today's discussion, even though there were some who kind of objected to this, it's enlightening. But there comes a point where your brain can only take so much, and so can your body. And so I'm wondering if it's possible to go ahead and recess for the evening. We was here until midnight last night. The previous night we were here midnight also. Our staff hasn't had a chance to really get any rest. I think a lot of us here, including the panel up there, probably could use a good night's rest. And so I'm just making a motion to go into recess at this time.
Until what time, or until when?
To tell you the truth, we haven't had a day off. It'd be nice to have a day off and celebrate Mess tomorrow with our families and whatnot. I wouldn't mind, even if we, you know, the way I look at it, there's still a lot of discussion, and even Mr. Carlson, in his conversation with Senator San Nicolas, agreed that there's still a lot of points that we still could converse and should converse about in terms of not just specifically about the BBT increase, but also the revenue enhancements and maybe even some other cuts that we may look at. But I think sometimes you need to step away from the picture just to get a good night's sleep, to breathe, to go home and hug your wife and kiss your kids, and come back perhaps refreshed after a good day's of rest. So I propose that we come back on Tuesday, perhaps 10 o'clock in the morning.
On the motion to recess, there's an objection. All in favor of the motion to
May-
recess
may I
until
speak on the
Tuesday at
objection,
10
Madam
a.m.?
Chair?
Pardon?
May I state my reason for the objection?
Not necessary. On the motion to recess, it's not debatable. It's only if you want to amend it. Would you like to amend that motion?
Madam Chair, I understand the need to have a day off and celebrate Mesh tomorrow, but we are in a budget situation, a financial crisis. Our fire department is shutting down 8 fire stations. Our police department is shutting down their precincts. So I recommend that we come back tomorrow, if that's the case, and not have a day off in the midst of this crisis.
Madam Chair, again,
The motion to...
Yes, I will amend the motion.
What time tomorrow?
$2 p.m. tomorrow, Madam Chair.
The motion, there's an amendment to the motion. All in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Is there any objection to the amendment to the motion to recess? There's an objection. So all in favor, please raise your hand. This is an amendment to change the recess time to tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. What did you say, Senator? 2 p.m.? Tomorrow, Monday at 2 p.m. All in favor, raise your hand.
It's a point of information, Madam Chair.
State your point of information.
You know, Madam Chair, we've been discussing extensively the fiscal situation, and rightfully so. Some of our colleagues have mentioned the critical nature of this. But just to put everything in context, and it's been mentioned by a number of senators, that on Wednesday there is a hearing on a particular proposal that would work and retool and provide the governor with additional flexibility. On Thursday, I understand there's two pieces of legislation endorsed by the governor when he called this legislative body into session. And then I believe on Friday evening there's another piece of legislation. So, Madam Chair, it's not like the legislature is not proceeding with ensuring the public's participation and involvement in this process. So I just want to make sure it's put in the right context in terms of, yes, the legislature is proceeding with a public hearing, and certainly hope that there would be that recognition on the part of the executive branch. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
All right, on the motion, is that... Are you speaking?
I just wanted to also raise a point of information, Madam Chair.
Yes, state your point of information.
I found, well, at the very least, well, actually multiple parts throughout today's proceedings very informative. First and foremost, and I guess I'll talk backwards from what's transpired tonight.
I'm sorry,
we
we're
have-
not debating this motion. If there's a point of information that you'd like to provide that we don't.
Yes, Madam
don't
Chairman,
before us.
information with respect to a recess, because we have a lot of new information in front of us now that provides us with various scenarios that we may be able to work if we have the opportunity to do the work. If we're going to be coming in and engaging in this tomorrow, I'm not against it, but I have a lot of information here that I can really work with to put together various scenarios for members to consider and then to go back and forth with, perhaps with the panel, with new information and new ideas. But until we have the opportunity to actually work on those ideas, we're going to be coming right back in, and that work won't be initiated. And I think that it will actually lock us further into the sole option on the table versus the various possibilities that are opening up as a result of the discussion. So in light of that, I would like for us to consider perhaps an extended recess for the purposes of not only the recuperation, as some members have mentioned, but there's additional work that we can do.
We're not
and we
able
need
to
time-
amend the
We need the
motion
time to do it.
to recess at this point until we deal with this one motion to amend. Okay, so we're on an amendment to the motion to recess, which states the time as tomorrow at 2 p.m. That would be Monday, 2 p.m. All in favor, please raise your hand. Motion fails. So on the original motion to recess, Senator Espadon, could you state your time again?
I believe I said 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning.
10 o'clock Tuesday morning. Is there any objection? There's an objection. All in favor, please raise your hand. Motion fails. Is there any other senator who has a question for the panel? Senator Rodriguez.
No question, Madam. I just have a motion I'd like to move.
Are there any other questions for the panel? I just have a quick question, if I may ask it from here. It's just really to ask if the BBMR will be, or the fiscal team will be providing a new fiscal realignment plan, or are we sticking with the one already submitted?
We're sticking with one.
All right. And is there any other additional analysis on the 16 revenue enhancement strategies available for dissemination to the body?
The only thing I don't have a number for is recreational marijuana.
But is there any other additional material that you would like to disseminate to the body regarding those 16 revenue enhancement strategies?
I believe that I can provide one cheat sheet that makes reference to, on the first 8, I think, the OFB, and then the rest, they're pretty simple, like $10 a day for a surcharge.
All right. Whatever information you have, if you could please, Mr. Camacho, is there any other additional information or analysis on any of the 16 revenue enhancement strategies that you could provide to the body?
I think we discussed that. I think we discussed that with SES, and I think we've
Since the
we
SES
provided
meeting.
most of that information.
Okay, so you think you provided everything available? DOA, any other additional information on the 16 revenue enhancement strategies that were proposed at SES?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Senator Snogs.
is Mr. Camacho going to be able to provide to us, because of the, was that number 17, the tax amnesty? You're going to be able to advise us what is the total amount of taxes that need to be collected? Because, you know, for the body, need to understand the tax amnesty is from the year before. It's not for current year. So it's just to know how much revenue is out there that needs to be collected, because we got to get a rough number of what it is, Mr. Camacho, because if we don't know, your $15, $20 million may not even come true at all.
I
Thank you,
can
sir.
provide the accounts receivable and give a breakdown of the taxes that are all, separate that from the interest and penalty. That way we can take a look at that number if you
But
want.
at the same time, if you can just have two sheets, one is without the interest and penalties and one with it. And the only reason why is because later on, depending on how much is collected, if the tax amnesty goes through, we would know what else needs to be still collected. And then how we can identify maybe a means to resource you with what you need to go after the folks that are not didn't apply for the tax amnesty.
Well, we'll do, Senator.
Thank you, sir.
Any further requests for information from members of the panel? Folks, the discussion initially was to bring in the panel members, exhaust all of our questions and our inquiries, and then we will dismiss them with a request that in fact they still make themselves readily available within the legislative hall or public hearing room as we deliberate on entertaining amendments, just in case there's any sidebar request for information. So that has been the process thus far. I noticed that Senator San Nicolas has his hand raised, and then Senator Nelson. Is there any further inquiries for the panel members? We're still entertaining.
Yes, real quick, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask if the panel can assist us with imploring Imagalahi to give us the opportunity to work with the information you provided. I understand that there's been attempts to rise and vote or rise and refer to committee, and then we're getting called back into session again. But we have a lot of information in front of us. I think we need to be afforded the opportunity to work on this information to see what other kind of solutions we can talk about. And so if I could inquire with the panel to please implore Imagalahi and Guahan to afford us the opportunity to actually work on this stuff. Because it's real good being provided to us, but we need to be able to work on it in order to be able to come to some kind of discussion as a body and a consensus for a vote eventually, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator San Nicolas. To members of the panel, I hope you recognize that particular request by Senator San Nicolas. Senator Nelson, you're recognized. Also for the members of the panel, Mr. Carlson, if you can reiterate and clarify, he said that as a side discussion, that Tuesday would be appropriate for him so that he can gather sufficient information as requested by members of the body and provide a response. So just FYI. Senator Nelson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was basically my question, is when we would be able to have some of the answers to the questions that we asked earlier. So Tuesday we should be anticipating. And then I also did a request to DOA to verify the date and the amount of when the Port Authority of Guam paid into the payment in lieu of taxes in accordance with the public law, and how much are they required to pay annually since then? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Senator Nelson. And Mr. Carlson, if you can reiterate the statement that I made. I don't want to put words in your mouth, please, with regards to possibly providing information to the body by Tuesday.
Oh. Yeah, we've been asked to do some stuff, and it's only prudent that we have the time to do it. I would love to say that we'd be ready by tomorrow, but quite honestly, I don't think that's possible. For the information for Senator San Nicolas, I'm going to reach out to OFB, and it'll be a joint effort so that what's presented to the body is consistent. The information that we give you is consistent. It's something that we share, we agree, and I hope that the body will have more enhanced level of comfort with that information. So it would take that kind of interaction to get what it is that he specifically asked for. I have a couple other notes of information that I need to provide, and then I would need to give this to the clerk so that copies can be made tonight, so you can kind of get an idea of some of the range of the revenue enhancements. But we are working on putting a budget from the agencies together. We have a timeline to provide that to the legislature. I've been unable to go to the office to look at the submittals that we have for the 19, specific to the 19, the agency responses. That's due, I think, on Tuesday. I didn't even take a look at that yet either, so I need a little time.
So, Mr. Carlson, what would be an appropriate time? You mentioned Tuesday as a possibility.
It was thrown out Tuesday at 10, so that's okay. Yeah, the individual agencies, in reference to the budget that we submitted, right? So they're sending their option 1, option 2s, and we're supposed to provide that to the legislature on, I think it's Tuesday.
That
Vice Speaker?
would those show the details of a potential $67 million cut in expenditures under option 2?
Yes, it would.
All right, okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carlson. Any further questions for members of the panel? It's been suggested by Mr. Carlson that in order for them to provide the information requested of the administration, that Tuesday would be an appropriate timeline. What is the wish of the body?
Mr. Chair, I move that we recess until Tuesday at 10 a.m.
It's a reconsideration, so notwithstanding the House rules, there's been a request to recess until Tuesday at 10 a.m. to allow the administration to provide information that has been requested. Senator Tom Addy, you recognize.
But will that give BBMR that gives him 2 working hours to get the information together that he needs?
Do you have any suggestions, Senator Addy?
So I would suggest recess until Tuesday at 2.
Mr. Chair, point of order. We are going to be reconvening on the special session for Bill 15-S on Tuesday at 2 p.m. So it should be 1:30 or another time, or maybe 2:30, if I may add.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Speaker. It's recognized. Okay, there's been a suggestion to modify the recess timeline to Tuesday, the afternoon at 2:30 to allow the administration to provide sufficient information as requested. Yes, Senator Sinagra.
Mr. Chairman, did I hear it correctly? The Vice Speaker said that we're meeting Tuesday for 15S?
Yes, this is a secondary special session that was called by the Chief Executive.
What was that letter that we received that he revoked it of 15S because he wanted 16S? And we already have a scheduled hearing on Friday for 15S? Why? See, we're spinning the wheels here, and all we're trying to do is get a recess so we can, like our colleagues have been talking about, we can look at what information we have and we can move on. Otherwise, we're not moving anywhere.
So noted, Senator Sinagra. On that particular issue, Senators, because there's still a scheduled reconvening of the special session at 2 p.m. on Tuesday for Bill 15-S. We're going to go with the recommendation that we reconvene this special session at 2:30 p.m. on Tuesday. Any objections? There's been an expression of objection. All those in favor of recessing to 2:30 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon to allow the administration to provide information requested, please signify by raising your hands. Clerk has counted 8 senators, 9 senators. This committee in the hall is hereby recessed to 2:30 p.m. on Tuesday.